The fluorescent hum of a rural Ohio 7-Eleven masks a chilling reality. When the sun sets, a cast of strange characters emerges, each with their own peculiar rituals and unsettling demands. Get ready for a first-hand account of navigating their unspoken rules and the terrifying encounters that come with enduring the night shift in this isolated outpost. I should have known something was wrong when Trevor handed me the keys on my first day. His hand shook, not from cold, but from something deeper, something that lived in his bones. He was the day shift manager, a thin man in his 50s with premature gray streaking through his hair like veins of silver in dark stone. When he pressed those keys into my palm, his fingers lingered a moment too long, as if he was passing me a curse rather than a set of store access. "Just follow the list," he said, nodding toward a laminated sheet taped beside the register. "Don't deviate. Don't improvise. Don't try to be a hero." I laughed because I thought he was joking. The list seemed absurdly specific. Face all products 4 by midnight. Never leave the back door unlocked after 11. Keep the coffee fresh, but don't brew a new pot after 2 in the morning. Strange instructions, sure, but nothing that screamed danger. Nothing that explained the haunted look in Trevor's eyes or the way he glanced over his shoulder at the empty parking lot before climbing into his sedan and driving away faster than necessary. The 7-Eleven sits at the intersection of Route 32 and Barlow Road, a crossing so insignificant that most GPS systems treat it as a suggestion rather than a destination. The nearest town, if you can call it that, is Millfield, population 800 and declining. Cornfields stretch in every direction, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or abandoned barn. During the day, the store services truckers, farmers, and the odd tourist who took a wrong turn somewhere near Athens. During the night, it services something else entirely. My name is Jordan Blake, and I needed this job. Not wanted it, needed it. My student loans had entered that special kind of collections hell where the threats become creative, and my previous employer, a call center in Columbus, had eliminated my position during restructuring, which is corporate speak for "we found someone who will work for less." The apartment I shared with 2 roommates required rent, and the rural Ohio job market offers exactly 2 options: farming or service industry. Since I can barely keep a succulent alive, the choice was clear. The first week passed without incident, which should have been my second warning. I arrived at 10 each evening, relieved Trevor, and settled into the rhythm of night shift retail. Stocked the shelves, cleaned the hot dog rollers, face products, helped the occasional customer. The store was open 24 hours, a beacon of fluorescent normalcy in an ocean of darkness. By midnight, the traffic would die completely, leaving me alone with the hum of refrigerators and the buzz of dying light tubes. The building itself was older than it had any right to be. Corporate had remodeled the facade, slapped on the modern 7-Eleven branding, but beneath the fresh paint and updated signage, you could see the bones of whatever came before. The foundation was uneven, causing the floor to tilt slightly toward the back. The walls were thicker than modern construction standards, built from cinder blocks that seemed to swallow sound. There were odd spaces behind the walls, gaps that appeared on no blueprint, where pipes and wiring ran through passages that shouldn't exist. The back room was the worst. It was too large for a store this size, extending far deeper than the building's exterior suggested. Shelves of overstock lined the walls, but there were sections in the back, past the employee bathroom and the tiny break area, where the inventory became strange. Discontinued products from decades ago, brands that no longer existed, packaging in languages I couldn't identify. Trevor told me not to go back there, to pull stock only from the front shelves, and I was happy to oblige because something about that space made my skin crawl. It was on day 8 that I met my first regular. He arrived at exactly 11:15, announced by the electronic chime that played whenever the door opened. I was restocking the candy aisle, and I heard his footsteps before I saw him. They were measured, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that suggested ritual rather than purpose. When I rounded the corner to greet him, the words died in my throat. He was tall, probably 6.5 feet, with the kind of thin frame that looked wrong on a person, as if someone had stretched him on a rack. His clothes were outdated but immaculate. Pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, a cardigan that wouldn't have looked out of place in a 1970s yearbook. But it was his face that stopped me cold. Not because it was ugly or deformed, but because it was perfectly average in a way that felt deliberately constructed, like an AI had been asked to create the most forgettable human face possible and had succeeded too well. "Good evening," he said, his voice a monotone that carried no warmth or inflection. The usual. I had no idea what his usual was. I had been working here just over a week and had never seen this man before. I opened my mouth to ask, but something in his expression, a subtle tightening around his eyes, made me reconsider. Instead, I went behind the counter and scanned the area, hoping context would provide an answer. That's when I noticed the list, Trevor's list, had additional notes scribbled in the margins. Notes I swear hadn't been there before. One of them read, "Raymond, 11:15, black coffee, 3 sugars, no cream. Ring up is $2 exactly. Do not speak unless spoken to." I prepared the coffee exactly as instructed, my hand steady despite the growing unease in my chest. Raymond, if that was indeed his name, stood at the counter without moving, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past my left shoulder. When I handed him the cup and told him $2, he placed exact change on the counter, 2 bills that looked crisp and new despite their worn appearance. "Thank you for maintaining the schedule," he said, taking his coffee. "Consistency is important in uncertain times." He left without another word, climbing into a sedan that looked as outdated as his clothing and driving away into the darkness. I stood behind the counter for several minutes after he left, trying to process what had just happened and failing completely. It was strange, certainly, but not threatening. Not yet. The next regular arrived an hour later. She was elderly, perhaps 80, with white hair pulled into a tight bun and clothes that suggested someone from a different era. She wore a floral dress despite the October cold, and her shoes were practical but ancient, the kind my grandmother might have worn. She moved slowly but with purpose, navigating the aisles with the confidence of someone who had made this trip 1,000 times before. I watched her from the counter, ready to offer assistance, but something told me to remain silent. She collected items methodically, a can of tomato soup, a box of saltines, a single yellow onion, and a pack of Camel cigarettes. When she approached the counter, she placed them in a specific order, left to right, and looked at me expectantly. I rang up her items, and as I did, I noticed another note on Trevor's list. Evelyn, 12:30. Exact items in exact order. Total should be $13.31. If it is not, adjust manually. She will not speak, and you should not either. The total came to $14.18. Following the instructions, I manually adjusted it, overriding the system to make it $13.31. Evelyn nodded once, a gesture of approval, and paid with exact change. She collected her items, placed them in a cloth bag she had brought, and left without a word. 2 regulars in one night, both operating on precise schedules with specific rituals. Coincidence, perhaps. Small towns bred habits, and lonely people found comfort in routine. But something about their movements, the deliberate nature of every action, suggested this was more than simple habit. This was something practiced, something necessary, though for what purpose I couldn't begin to guess. The rest of that shift passed quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I caught myself glancing at the security monitors, expecting to see figures standing just outside the camera's range. The cornfield surrounding the store seemed to press closer in the darkness, and the fluorescent lights inside suddenly felt less like protection and more like a spotlight, announcing my presence to whatever lurked beyond. When Trevor arrived at 6 in the morning to relieve me, he looked at me with something between pity and resignation. "You met them," he said, not a question but statement. "Raymond and Evelyn," I confirmed. "Are they always so precise?" Trevor finished. "Yes, and there are others. More than I told you about because I needed you to take this job. And if you knew the truth, you would have run." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "The rules aren't suggestions, Jordan. They're survival instructions. Follow them exactly, no matter how strange they seem, and you'll be fine." Probably. That probably hung in the air between us like a thread. "What happens if I don't?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Trevor pulled up his sleeve, revealing a scar on his forearm. 3 parallel lines that looked like claw marks but deeper, more deliberate. "You learn," he said simply. "And if you're lucky, you learn without permanent damage." He wouldn't elaborate further, and I didn't press. I drove home as dawn broke over the cornfields, exhausted but unable to sleep. My mind kept returning to Raymond's expressionless face and Evelyn's methodical movements. They were human, certainly, but there was something off about them, something that existed in the uncanny valley between normal and nightmare. I should have quit then, should have walked away from the job and found something, anything else. But the rent was due, the student loans were circling, and most damning of all, I was curious. What were these rules protecting me from? What would happen if they were broken? And most importantly, who or what were these regulars, really? The questions plagued me through the day, invading my fitful dreams and coloring my waking thoughts. By the time I returned that evening for my next shift, I had convinced myself it was all explainable, that small-town eccentricity and my own exhaustion had combined to make something mundane seem sinister. I was wrong. So terribly, completely wrong. Because as I unlocked the door that evening and stepped into the fluorescent glow, I noticed something new on Trevor's list. Something that definitely hadn't been there before, written in handwriting that wasn't his. The ink was dark red, almost brown, and the letters were formed with disturbing precision. It read, "New rule. After 3 in the morning, if you hear knocking from inside the walk-in cooler, do not investigate. Do not open the door. Do not acknowledge the sound. Wait until dawn, and it will stop. Breaking this rule has consequences that cannot be undone." I looked up from the list to find my reflection in the store window, and behind it, barely visible in the glass, I thought I saw someone standing in the parking lot. When I spun around, there was nothing there but empty asphalt and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. But I couldn't shake the certainty that something had been watching me, sizing me up, determining whether I was worth keeping or worth consuming. The night stretched ahead, full of hours and uncertainty, and I realized with growing dread that this was only the beginning. Whatever existed in this isolated corner of Ohio, whatever rules governed its operation, I was now part of it. The question wasn't whether I would encounter more strangeness, but whether I would survive it long enough to understand what I had stumbled into. And somewhere in the back of the store, deeper than the stockroom should extend, I swear I heard something moving. The second week transformed my understanding of normal. What I had initially dismissed as small-town quirks revealed themselves to be something far more structured. An entire ecosystem of bizarre behavior governed by rules I was only beginning to comprehend. The regulars weren't just odd customers. They were participants in something ancient and unspoken, and I was now expected to play my part without fully understanding the script. Trevor's list grew longer each night. New rules appeared in that disturbing reddish-brown ink, instructions that made less sense the more I read them. Never count the tiles on the ceiling after midnight. If a customer asks for directions to somewhere that doesn't exist, provide them anyway. The phone will ring at 2:47. Let it ring exactly 6 times. Then answer with yes and nothing else. I started a notebook, documenting each regular and their specific requirements. It became my Bible, my survival guide in this increasingly surreal landscape. The patterns emerged slowly, like shapes appearing in dense fog. But they were there, consistent and unyielding. Raymond arrived every night at 11:15, never a minute early or late. Same black coffee, same 3 sugars, same cryptic statement about consistency. But I began to notice details I had missed initially. He never blinked, not once during our entire interaction. His eyes remained fixed and glassy, like a taxidermied animal. And when he spoke, his lips moved slightly out of sync with his words, as if he was dubbed in a foreign film. Evelyn followed at 12:30, her arrival so precise I could set my watch by it. Same items in same order, same silent transaction. But on my 10th night, she deviated. Instead of leaving immediately, she paused at the door and turned back to look at me. Her eyes, which I had assumed were simply aged and cloudy, were completely white, no iris or pupil visible. She smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for someone her age, and spoke the first time. "You're learning," she said, her voice like dried leaves scraping concrete. "Good. The quick learners last longer." Then she was gone, leaving me with shaking hands and a dozen new questions. Last longer than what? What happened to the slow learners? And what exactly was I learning beyond an elaborate series of arbitrary tasks? The third regular introduced himself on day 12. He arrived at exactly 1:15 in the morning, during what should have been the deadest hour of the night. I heard his motorcycle before I saw him, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the building's foundation. He parked directly under the flickering light that I had reported for maintenance 3 times, and which Trevor kept insisting was supposed to do that. He was younger than the others, perhaps mid-30s, with grease-stained hands and a leather jacket that had seen better decades. His name tag, which he wore despite not working anywhere I could identify, read Dale in faded letters. Unlike Raymond and Evelyn, Dale was almost aggressively normal in his behavior, chatting about weather and sports and local gossip while he shopped. "Hell of a job you got here," he said, loading up on energy drinks and beef jerky. "Most people don't last a month." "Why is that?" I asked, hungry for any information. Dale grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, isolation gets to people. Long hours, strange customers, the usual." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Plus, there are the disappearances." My blood went cold. Disappearances. Sure, every few years, a night shift worker just stops showing up. No notice, no forwarding address, nothing. Trevor's been here longest, going on 8 years now. Before him there was Kelly, lasted 6 months. Before her was someone whose name nobody remembers, lasted 2 weeks. He straightened, collecting his items. "But I'm sure you'll be fine. You seem like a quick study." He paid with a $50 bill that was crisp despite his generally disheveled appearance, told me to keep the change, and left. I checked the register after he departed. The 50 was real, but when I held it up to the light, I could see watermarks that didn't match any currency I recognized. Symbols that looked older than America itself, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. I added Dale to my notebook. Arrives 1:15, buys energy drinks and jerky, leaves excessive tips, possibly knows more than he's saying. Money is wrong somehow. The fourth regular arrived at 2 in the morning, and with her came the first real moment of terror. She was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, and the kind of athletic build that suggested either military or law enforcement. She wore a jogging suit despite the late hour and cold weather, and she moved with the fluid grace of someone very aware of their body and surroundings. Her name, I would later learn, was Christine, though she never introduced herself formally. Christine browsed for nearly 30 minutes, touching products without removing them from shelves, reading labels without apparent interest, moving through the store in a pattern that seemed random until I sketched in my notebook and realized she was tracing a perfect figure 8, over and over, never deviating from the path. When she finally approached the counter, she didn't have any items. Instead, she placed both hands on the counter and leaned forward, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You see them too, don't you?" she whispered. "See what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "The others. The ones who aren't really here. The ones who shop when no one's looking." She glanced toward the security monitors. "Check camera 3. Tell me what you see." I reluctantly looked at the monitor displaying camera 3, which covered the back corner near the refrigerated section. The screen showed empty aisles, exactly as they should appear at 2 in the morning. I started to tell Christine this when movement caught my eye. On the very edge of the frame, barely visible, a figure stood facing the corner. They were completely still, arms at their sides, and though I couldn't make out details, something about their posture suggested they had been standing there for a very long time. "I don't remember anyone going back there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Christine nodded knowingly. "Because they didn't go. They were always there. They're always there. You just haven't learned to see them yet." She pulled back from the counter. "But you will. Everyone who lasts more than a month learns to see them. That's when the real rules begin." She left without purchasing anything, jogging away into the darkness from which she had emerged. I kept my eyes on camera 3 for the next hour, watching that figure in the corner. They never moved, never shifted position, never acknowledged that they were being observed. At 3:15 exactly, between one blink and the next, they were gone. I sprinted to the back corner, my heart hammering, and found nothing. No trace of anyone having been there. No footprints in the dust that accumulated despite my nightly cleaning. No displacement of air or lingering warmth. Just empty space and the hum of refrigeration units. That night, I violated one of Trevor's cardinal rules. After Christine left, consumed by growing paranoia and desperate curiosity, I went into the back room, past the employee bathroom, past the break area, into the sections Trevor had specifically forbidden. The overhead lights flickered more frequently back there, and the air felt different, heavier, as if the atmosphere itself was thicker. The old inventory lined the shelves in haphazard stacks, products from eras I could barely identify. There was a display of soda bottles with labels in Russian Cyrillic, boxes of breakfast cereal featuring cartoon characters that looked almost, but not quite like familiar mascots, and magazines whose cover dates went back decades, but whose paper seemed fresh and new. And there, in the very back corner where the shadows were deepest, I found a door. It wasn't locked, wasn't even fully closed, but something about it radiated wrongness. The wood was darker than the surrounding walls, older, and the doorknob was brass, tarnished nearly black. No sign indicated what lay beyond, no warning or instruction, but every instinct I possessed screamed at me to leave it alone. I reached for the knob anyway. My fingers were an inch away when I heard breathing behind me. I spun around to find Trevor standing there, still in his day clothes, his face pale and expression horrified. "I told you," he said quietly, "not to go back here." I needed to understand. I protested. The regulars, the rules, the things Christine said. "What is this place?" Trevor grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the door with surprising strength. "This place is exactly what it needs to be," he said. "A border, a threshold, a place where certain agreements are maintained." He released me and ran a hand through his hair. "The 7-Eleven isn't just a convenience store, Jordan. It's a way station. The regulars aren't just customers. They're guardians, or prisoners, or maybe both. I don't fully understand it myself, and the people who did understand are gone now." "Gone where?" He pointed toward the door I'd almost opened. "Through there, or somewhere like there. There are spaces between spaces, places that exist only when observed or needed. This store sits on one such place, has for longer than the building itself has stood here. Whatever came before, whatever comes after, they all serve the same purpose, which is keeping things in or keeping things out. Depends on your perspective." Trevor moved toward the exit, gesturing for me to follow. "The rules aren't arbitrary, Jordan. They're a bargain. Follow them, serve the regulars properly, maintain the schedule, and the threshold remains stable. Break them, deviate, ignore the patterns, and he trailed off, pulling up his sleeve again to show the scars. You weaken the barrier, and things slip through. We return to the main store area. The fluorescent normalcy is stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the back room. Trevor checked his watch and swore softly. It's almost 3. You need to be behind counter. The phone will ring soon, and you must answer correctly. Whatever you do tonight, no matter what you see or hear, do not go back there again. Do not open that door. Do not acknowledge the sounds. What sounds? As if in answer, a deep thud echoed from the walk-in cooler. The sound of something heavy striking metal. Then another. Then a third, establishing a rhythm like a heartbeat or a countdown. Trevor's face went even paler. The knocking. It's early tonight. That's new. He backed toward the exit. Remember the rule, Jordan. Do not open that door. Do not acknowledge it. No matter what you hear, no matter what it sounds like, stay behind the counter until dawn. He left me there, alone with the rhythmic pounding from the cooler and the approaching 2:47 phone call. I stood behind the counter, my notebook clutched like a talisman, and watched the clock tick toward the designated moment. At 2:47 exactly, the phone rang. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, counting carefully. At the 6th ring, I picked up and said, yes, as instructed. Silence greeted me, but not empty silence. This was the silence of something listening, of presence and attention. I could hear breathing, or what might have been breathing if something that didn't need air had decided to imitate the sound. Then, after 30 seconds that felt like hours, a voice spoke. The schedule is maintained. It said, words that carried no emotion or inflection. The threshold holds, but cracks are forming. We have noticed the new one, the one who almost touched the door. Tell them to be more careful. Tell them that curiosity has ended arrangements that lasted centuries. The line went dead. I stood there, receiver in hand, listening to the dial tone while the knocking from the cooler continued its steady rhythm. Around me, the store seemed different somehow, as if everything had shifted slightly to the left, as if the angles of the walls and shelves were no longer quite Euclidean. The fluorescent lights buzzed with renewed intensity, and in their harsh glare, I saw shadows where shadows shouldn't exist, movements in my peripheral vision that disappeared when I looked directly. The remaining hours until dawn crawled past with agonizing slowness. Raymond arrived exactly on schedule, collected his coffee, made his statement about consistency. Evelyn followed at 12:30, though tonight she glanced toward the cooler and frowned slightly before leaving. Dale never showed, breaking pattern for the first time, and his absence felt more ominous than anyone's presence. Christine returned at 4:15, off schedule, and approached the counter with urgency. You went to the back, she said, not a question. You touched the door, or almost did. I can smell it on you, the scent of between places. I didn't open it. I protested. But you wanted to, and one is enough, sometimes. One creates cracks. She leaned in close. They're testing you now. The next few nights will be crucial. More regulars will come, ones you haven't met yet, ones with stranger requirements and less patience. Follow the rules perfectly, Jordan. Your life depends on it. And so does something much larger. She left as suddenly as she had arrived, and I was alone again with the knocking and the shadows and the growing certainty that I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. The job I had taken out of desperation had become a trial, and failure meant something worse than unemployment. When dawn finally broke and Trevor arrived for the shift change, he took one look at my face and nodded grimly. You heard the voice on the phone. You understand now, at least partially. He began his opening checklist, moving through the store with practiced efficiency. The regulars will increase. The tests will become more specific. And somewhere, In the next few weeks, you'll be presented with a choice. When that happens, remember, the rules exist for a reason, and breaking them breaks more than you know. I drove home as the sun climbed higher, bringing warmth and light that felt like a lie after the night's revelations. My apartment, my roommates, the normal world of bills and obligations seemed alien now, a play I was no longer qualified to perform in, because I had seen behind the curtain, touched the edge of something vast and incomprehensible, and that knowledge changed everything. That afternoon, unable to sleep, I researched the location of the 7-Eleven. The current building had been constructed in 1985, but before that, a gas station had occupied the spot. Before the gas station, a general store. Before that, a trading post. Stretching back through property records and historical documents, I found a pattern. Something had always stood at that intersection, some kind of commercial or communal space, going back over 200 years. And in the margins of old newspapers and journals, I found references to disappearances. People who had worked at whatever establishment currently occupied that spot, vanishing without explanation. The patterns were there if you knew to look for them. Every few years, someone gone. Every few decades, multiple someones. A sacrifice, perhaps, or a price, or simply the cost of maintaining whatever balance the regulars and their rules supported. I was part of that pattern now, a temporary guardian of a threshold I didn't understand, serving customers who might not be entirely human, following rules written by people who might no longer exist. The question wasn't whether I would survive, but whether I would last long enough to understand what I was surviving. And in my notebook, on a page I hadn't written on, new text appeared in that familiar reddish-brown ink. Rule 47. When you realize you're trapped, stop trying to escape. Acceptance is the first step toward comprehension. Fight, and the threshold consumes you. Serve, and you might see another sunrise. Choose wisely. Jordan Blake. Very few are given the luxury of choice. I close the notebook and try to sleep, knowing that tonight would bring new horrors, new tests, new regulars with new demands. The fluorescent hum of the 7-Eleven already echoed in my thoughts, a siren song pulling me back toward the intersection where reality grew thin and the rules were all that kept chaos at bay. The third week shattered any remaining illusions of normalcy. The regulars multiplied, each bringing their own peculiar rituals and unspoken demands. Trevor's list evolved into a manuscript, pages and pages of instructions that contradicted themselves and made sense only in the moment they were needed. I learned to trust my instincts over logic, to follow patterns I didn't understand, and to never, ever question why. The Whispering Man arrived on day 15. He came during the space between spaces, that dead hour around 3:30, when time itself seemed to slow and stretch. I heard him before I saw him. Not footsteps, but a sound like static, like the universe's background radiation given voice. When he finally materialized in the doorway, I understood why Trevor had devoted an entire page to him in the instructions. He was tall and thin like Raymond, but where Raymond's features were aggressively average, the Whispering Man's face was impossible to focus on. My eyes would track toward him, register the beginning of features, then slide away as if my brain refused to process what it was seeing. He wore a suit that might have been black or might have been the absence of color, and when he moved, he left trailing afterimages like a photograph with too much motion blur. 23 days, he whispered, his voice layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist in human speech. 23 days until the convergence. 17 hours until the first breach. 96 minutes until something precious is lost forever. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand explanations, but Trevor's instructions were explicit. Never speak to the Whispering Man, never acknowledge his prophecies, never ask for clarification. Simply nod, ring up his purchase of exactly 3 items regardless of what they are, and charge him $7.77. He placed items on the counter. A bag of ice that was already melting despite coming from functioning freezer, a newspaper dated 3 weeks in the future, and a carton of milk that was somehow both full and empty depending on the angle you looked at it. I rang them up, my hands surprisingly steady, and told them the total. The whispering man paid with $7 bills and 3 quarters. Exact change that shouldn't have existed because I had never seen 3-quarter coins before, but there they were, solid and real in my palm. They were warm, almost hot, and when I placed them in the register, they transformed into standard quarters the moment they left my fingers. "The cracks are spreading," he whispered, reaching out with one hand to touch the counter. Where his finger made contact, frost formed in intricate patterns, geometric shapes that repeated and branched like fractals. The door calls to you. The threshold weakens. Time is running out, running in, running sideways through spaces between seconds. Then he was gone, not walking out, but simply ceasing to exist in one location and presumably existing somewhere else. The frost on the counter melted rapidly, but it left behind a stain, a mark that no amount of cleaning would ever fully remove. I added it to my growing collection of permanent changes the regulars left behind. Scuff marks that moved when you weren't looking, water stains in the shape of symbols I couldn't interpret, and now frostburn in fractal patterns. The coin collector appeared next, arriving precisely at 4:15. I had met him before, on night 11, but Trevor had provided minimal information about him beyond humor his obsession and never reveal the total count. He was middle-aged, balding, with the soft build of someone who spent more time with collections than with people. He carried a metal detector despite being indoors, and he would methodically scan every surface, every corner, his eyes lighting up whenever the device beeped. He would dig coins from behind shelves, under displays, in cracks in tile floor, finding currency that hadn't been there minutes before. 47 tonight, he muttered, more to himself than to me. 47 copper souls seeking redemption. 47 memories of transactions never completed. He pocketed each coin with ritualistic care, cataloging them in a leather-bound journal whose pages looked like human skin. When he finished his sweep, he would always purchase a lottery ticket, scratch it off at the counter, and smile regardless of the result. "Not tonight," he would say, "but soon. Soon the right combination will appear, and then everything changes." I had learned not to watch him too closely because his shadow didn't match his movements. While he bent down to retrieve a coin, his shadow would remain standing. While he walked down one aisle, his shadow would explore another. And sometimes, when the fluorescent lights flickered in their increasingly frequent fashion, I would see additional shadows, 3 or 4 or more, all moving independently of their owner. The 4th week introduced me to the Phantom Smoker, and with him came my first close call. He appeared and disappeared without pattern, materializing in different sections of the store at random intervals. One moment the candy aisle would be empty. The next he would be standing there, cigarette burning despite the prominent no smoking signs, surrounded by a gray haze that smelled like burning photographs and forgotten promises. Trevor's instructions for the Phantom Smoker were brief but emphatic. Do not tell him to put out his cigarette. Do not mention the smoke. Do not acknowledge anything unusual, and absolutely do not breathe deeply when near him. The smoke was not smoke, not really, and inhaling it would show me things I didn't want to see. I made it 3 encounters before I slipped. It was night 22, during a particularly slow period around 4 in the morning. Exhaustion had dulled my attention, and when the Phantom Smoker materialized near the coffee station, I was cleaning the hot dog rollers without paying proper attention to my surroundings. The smoke drifted toward me, carried on a breeze that shouldn't exist in the climate-controlled store, and I inhaled before I could stop myself. The world inverted. Suddenly I could see the store as it truly was, layers upon layers of existence stacked like transparencies. In one layer, I stood alone in a modern 7-Eleven, bright and clean and normal. In another layer, the building was older, rougher, a gas station from decades past with different products and different lighting. In a third layer, it wasn't a building at all, but a clearing in ancient forest. And I wasn't me, but someone else, something else, wearing clothes from a century I couldn't name. And in all the layers, the regulars were there, shopping eternally, their movements synchronized across time like a cosmic choreography. Raymond purchasing his coffee in 1985, 1956, 1923, his face unchanging across the decades. Evelyn selecting her exact items in every era, young and old, and something beyond both simultaneously. Dale riding up on motorcycles that evolved backward through history, from modern sport bike to vintage chopper to something steam-powered and impossible. But worst of all were the others. The customers Christine had mentioned, the ones who shopped when no one was looking. They filled every layer, hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, their forms flickering between human and something else entirely. They reached for products with too many fingers, walked with gaits that defied anatomy, and when they turned to look at me, their eyes were holes punched through reality itself, showing the swirling chaos beneath the world's thin veneer, and threading through everything, connecting all the layers like neural pathways, were the rules. I could see them now, glowing lines of text that rewrote themselves constantly, adapting and evolving with each transaction, each interaction, each moment. They formed a web, a containment field, holding something vast and hungry just beyond the threshold, just behind that door in the back room. The vision lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like hours. When my normal sight returned, I was on my knees behind the counter, blood streaming from my nose, and the phantom smoker was gone. The smoke lingered, forming words in the air before dissipating. Now you see. Now you understand. Now you can never leave. Christine found me 10 minutes later, still on the floor, still trying to process what I had witnessed. She helped me up with surprising gentleness, wet a cloth from the bathroom, and cleaned the blood from my face. "You breathed it," she said. Not an accusation, but a statement of fact. "I knew you would eventually. Everyone does. The temptation is built into the arrangement. What is this place?" I manage, my voice raw. "What are we really doing here?" Christine sounded the counter, a violation of store policy that somehow seemed trivial now. "We're holding the line." That's the simplest explanation, though it's inadequate. Reality is thinner in some places, worn through by use or time or intention. This spot, this intersection, it's been a thin place for centuries. Long before the 7-Eleven, long before America itself, something recognized this location as a crossing point. A crossing point for what? For everything that doesn't fit in the neat little box humans call reality. The things that exist in margins and shadows. The entities that are incompatible with your physical laws. The concepts that gain consciousness and hunger. She gestured around the store. This place is a valve, a pressure release. The regulars are the maintenance crew, making sure the valve opens and closes properly. And you, us, the night shift workers, we're the operators. We follow the rules, serve the regulars, maintain the schedule, and in doing so, we keep the barrier intact. And if we don't, Christine's expression darkened. Then things slipped through. Small things at first, coincidences and glitches, déjà vu and paranoia. But it escalates. The cracks widen. Eventually, something large enough and hungry enough forces its way through. And then, she made a gesture of expansion. Reality breaks in a localized area. The thin place tears open. Whatever has been pressing against the barrier from the other side comes through. Has it happened before? Twice that I know of. Once in 1952, when a night shift worker decided the rules were superstitious nonsense and deliberately violated every instruction. The resulting breach lasted 3 days. 17 people disappeared. The nearest town reported a week of shared nightmares, and livestock for miles around gave birth to stillborn offspring with wrong anatomies. She paused, remembering. The second time was in 1987. A worker fell asleep on shift, missed multiple regular appointments, let the schedule collapse. That breach was smaller, only lasted an hour, but it was enough. 2 people were found wandering the cornfields with no memory of their identities, speaking in languages that didn't exist. They still live in a special facility, still speaking those languages, still trying to remember who they used to be. I thought about the Whispering Man's prophecy. 23 days until convergence. What convergence? Something's coming, I said. Something bigger than before. Christine nodded. The regulars are increasing in frequency. The rules are multiplying. The threshold is under more pressure than it has been in decades. I don't know why, but I know it's accelerating. And you, specifically you, Jordan, you're somehow central to whatever's coming. Why me? I'm nobody. I just needed a job. That's what everyone says before they realize they're part of something larger. She hopped down from the counter. But chance isn't chance in places like this. You were drawn here because you were needed here. The question is whether you'll be strong enough to do what's necessary when the moment comes. She left before I could ask what that moment might be, walking out into the pre-dawn darkness as if she had never been there. I checked the security cameras and saw no record of her arrival or departure. Just empty footage of me, alone in the store, bleeding from the nose, and then cleaning myself up, apparently talking to no one. The remaining nights of the 4th week brought new horrors in rapid succession. The regulars began arriving in clusters, overlapping their schedules in ways that should have been impossible according to Trevor's carefully maintained timeline. I would be serving Raymond when Evelyn appeared early, both of them occupying the space while maintaining their individual rituals. The coin collector would scan for his copper souls while the phantom smoker materialized in the same aisle, their contradictory requirements forcing me to multitask in ways that felt like solving quantum equations. And there were new regulars, ones Trevor hadn't documented because they had never appeared before. The backwards woman who walked in reverse, conducting her entire transaction in mirror image while speaking words that made sense only when heard in retrograde. The child who wasn't, a young boy who aged and de-aged randomly during his visit, shopping for candy with hands that were sometimes infant small and sometimes elderly withered. The fluorescent man whose skin emitted the same buzzing light as the overhead tubes, bright enough to cast shadows that screamed when you stepped on them. Each new regular added layers of complexity to my nightly routine. The rules expanded to accommodate them, appearing in that reddish-brown ink faster than I could document them. My notebook became a grimoire, filled with instructions that read like incantations, sketches of the regulars that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at the page, and timestamps that recorded moments that never appeared on any clock. On night 26, I had my closest call yet. It was 5 a.m, just an hour before Trevor would arrive, and I was exhausted beyond measure. The night had been particularly demanding. 11 different regulars, each with escalating requirements, each arrival pushing the boundaries of what I thought possible. The Whispering Man had appeared 3 separate times, each prophecy more urgent than the last. The coin collector had found 73 coins, far above his normal count, and had been visibly distressed by the number. I was restocking the beer cooler, my back to the store, when I heard the door in the back room open. Not the entrance door with its electronic chime, but the other door, the forbidden door, the threshold. The sound was unmistakable, old hinges creaking, with scraping against warped floor, and beneath it, something like breathing or wind or the whisper of vast spaces compressing into confined ones. I dropped the case of beer I was holding and ran toward the back room, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that the door should never open, that whatever lay beyond should remain beyond. I reached the backroom threshold and stopped dead. The door was open, swinging slowly on its ancient hinges, and beyond it was not a room or closet or storage space. Beyond it was everything and nothing, a space that couldn't exist within the building's physical parameters. I saw corridors stretching in impossible directions, rooms stacked upon rooms in non-Euclidean architecture, stairs that climbed downward, and descending paths that led to heights. The space was lit by sourceless light that hurt to look at, and in the distance, moving through those impossible corridors, I saw figures. Hundreds of them. Thousands. An army of regulars, past and present, and perhaps future, all shopping eternally in a store that existed outside of time. And something else, something vast and dark and hungry, pressed against the far edges of that space, testing the barriers, searching for weaknesses. When it noticed my attention, it turned toward me with awareness that felt like being crushed under oceanic pressure. Jordan, Trevor's voice, screaming my name despite it being an hour before he should arrive. His hands grabbed my shoulders and yanked me backward with desperate strength. The moment I broke eye contact with that vast hungry thing, the door slammed shut with a sound like thunder, and Trevor was pushing me out of the back room, back into the fluorescent normalcy of the main store. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, his face pale and terrified. "You were about to step through. Another second, and you would have been lost." I wasn't going to. But the words died because I realized he was right. I had been leaning forward, one foot lifting to take a step toward that impossible space. Some part of me, some deep and primal instinct, had been drawn to whatever lay beyond. Trevor checked the clock, swore viciously. "It's accelerating faster than I thought. The door shouldn't open randomly. It should only open during specific moments, controlled moments. If it's opening on its own, that means the pressure is too great. The barrier is failing." The whispering man said 23 days until convergence. I said, "That was 6 days ago. 17 days left." Trevor ran both hands through his hair. "Not enough time. We need to strengthen the protocols, increase the regular interactions, reinforce the schedule." He looked at me with something between pity and determination. "You need to work double shifts, days and nights. The continuous presence of a conscious observer will help stabilize things. I can barely handle the nights. How am I supposed to?" "You don't have a choice." Trevor snapped. "None of us do. You think I want to be here? You think I enjoy serving customers who aren't entirely human while maintaining rules I don't fully understand? I stay because I have to stay. Because if I leave, if the position goes unfilled, even for a day, the whole arrangement collapses. And now, with whatever's coming, we need more than I can provide alone." He was right, and I knew it. The exhaustion, the fear, the growing certainty that I was losing my grip on reality, all of it was secondary to the simple fact that something had to be done. The barrier had to hold. The threshold had to be maintained. Because the alternative, the thing I had glimpsed pressing against the far edges of that impossible space, was worse than any personal suffering. "How long?" I asked. "How long do I have to do this?" Trevor's expression answered before his words did. "Until it's over. However long that takes. Could be weeks. Could be years. Could be the rest of your life." He moved toward the exit, his shift somehow already complete despite arriving impossibly early. "Get some rest today. Real rest. Because starting tomorrow, you're here 24/7 until this passes. The regulars need to see you, need to know the operator is present and attentive. It's the only way to buy us more time." He left, and I stood alone in the store as dawn broke over the cornfields. Alone except for the regulars I could now see, even during daylight hours, faint and translucent but present. Raymond at his eternal 11:15 position, frozen mid-reach for coffee that hadn't been poured yet. Evelyn browsing shelves that still needed stocking, her hands passing through products not yet placed. Dale standing in a parking lot still empty of his motorcycle, smoking a cigarette that wouldn't exist for hours. And behind them all, barely visible in the morning light, the others. The thousands of shoppers who existed between moments, their forms flickering like bad reception, their eyes always watching, always waiting for the barrier to fail and release them into a world that couldn't contain them. I drove home as the sun climbed higher, but I knew I wouldn't sleep. Couldn't sleep, because in my mind's eye, I kept seeing that doors swinging open, kept feeling that pull toward the impossible spaces beyond, kept sensing that vast, hungry thing waiting for its chance to break through. 17 days until convergence. 17 days to prevent whatever apocalypse the whispering man had prophesied. 17 days to maintain rules I barely understood in service of regulars who might not be entirely real, all to protect a reality that felt more fragile with each passing moment. I parked in front of my apartment and sat in the car, unable to force myself to go inside and pretend everything was normal. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a message in that familiar reddish-brown text, even though the phone should only display standard colors. Rule 91. When the door opens on its own, it means you've been chosen. Not chosen for honor or reward, but chosen for necessity. The threshold requires a guardian, and you have been selected whether you accept it or not. Resist, and it consumes you. Accept, and it merely devours you slowly. There is no third option. The convergence approaches. Jordan Blake. Prepare yourself for sacrifice. I closed the phone and stared at the 7-Eleven keychain Trevor had given me on my first day. In the morning sunlight, I could see it was older than it appeared, the plastic worn smooth by countless hands, countless night shift workers who had come before me. And on the back, so faint I had never noticed it before, were engraved names. Dozens of them. All the previous operators. All the people who had stood where I now stood, serving the regulars and maintaining the rules. Some names had dates beside them. Others just had check marks. And the most recent name, the one just before mine would presumably be added, had a symbol I couldn't interpret, something that looked like a doorway, or a mouth, or perhaps both. I got out of the car and went inside, knowing sleep wouldn't come, but needing to try anyway. Because in 17 days, something would happen. Something large enough to require prophecy, significant enough to weaken barriers that had held for centuries, important enough that reality itself was taking notice. And I, Jordan Blake, former call center employee and current night shift operator at a rural Ohio 7-Eleven, would be at the center of it all, not because I was special or chosen in any meaningful way, but simply because I had needed a job and this was the position available. The universe's most terrifying joke, apocalypse by convenience store. The double shifts began on day 28, and with them came a strange clarity. Exhaustion has a way of stripping away pretense, leaving only the essential mechanics of survival. I learned to function in a state of perpetual wakefulness, my consciousness hovering somewhere between alert and dreaming, a place where the strange behavior of the regulars felt almost normal. Trevor met me at sunrise, his face haggard but determined. "I've adjusted the schedule," he said, handing me a revised list that had somehow tripled in length overnight. "You'll take breaks in the back room, 30 minutes every 6 hours, but you cannot leave the building. Your presence needs to be continuous, unbroken. The regulars need to feel the stability of a constant operator." "What about you?" I asked. "I'll be here during transitions, helping with the handoffs between day and night protocols. But the primary responsibility is yours now." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt both reassuring and damning. "I know this is asking a lot, more than anyone should have to give. But you're stronger than you think, Jordan. You've lasted longer than most already." The first full day revealed patterns I had missed during my night-only shifts. The daytime regulars were different from the nighttime ones, less overtly strange, but no less bound by ritual. There was Mrs. Patterson, elderly and sharp, who arrived at exactly 8:05 every morning for a newspaper she would read in her car for precisely 47 minutes before returning it, unfolded but somehow read. There was the Reverend, who came at noon to purchase a single banana and would bless the entire store in Latin before leaving. There was truck driver Mike, who stopped at 3:30 for coffee and would tell the same story about the time he saw something strange on Highway 50, the details never varying, the punchline never landing, his eyes always checking the parking lot, as if expecting that strange something to follow him here. They had rules too, less complex than the night shift regulars, but no less important. The newspaper had to be from the previous day, not current. The banana had to be exactly 7 inches long, measured with a ruler I kept behind the counter specifically for this purpose. The coffee for Mike had to be from the third pot from the left, never the first or second, and serve at exactly 147 degrees Fahrenheit. I adapted, learning to move fluidly between the day and night protocols, my hands remembering sequences my conscious mind couldn't track. The art of the nod, as I came to think of it, became my primary survival strategy. Acknowledge without engaging, serve without questioning, maintain the transaction while keeping emotional distance. The regulars seemed to appreciate this approach. Raymond's blank expression would soften almost imperceptibly when I had his coffee ready before he reached the counter. Evelyn's white eyes would crinkle at the corners, perhaps a smile, when her items were arranged correctly without her needing to rearrange them. Even the phantom smoker's appearances became less jarring as I learned to move around him without breathing deeply, serving other customers while he existed in his cloud of not smoke. But the continuous presence took its toll. By day 3 of double shifts, I was seeing things in my peripheral vision constantly. Not just the translucent forms of regulars shopping out of phase, but deeper distortions. The floor would ripple like water. The walls would breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched no human pulse. Products on shelves would rearrange themselves when I blinked, forming patterns and symbols that vanished before I could properly observe them. I developed systems to maintain sanity. Every 2 hours, I would count the register, the physical act of handling real currency, grounding me in the material world. Every 4 hours, I would clean something, the routine of wiping down surfaces or mopping floors providing a meditative focus. Every 6 hours, I would eat something from the store, forcing my body to remember its needs, even as my mind tried to drift into the strange spaces the regulars inhabited. The back room became both sanctuary and prison. During my mandated breaks, I would sit in the corner farthest from the forbidden door, my back against the wall, and try to rest without sleeping. True sleep was dangerous now. In sleep, I would dream of the impossible spaces beyond the threshold, of corridors that led nowhere and everywhere, of the vast hungry thing pressing against the barriers. Better to remain in that twilight state, conscious but not thinking, present but not participating. Christine visited more frequently during this period, appearing during the liminal hours between day and night protocols. She brought supplies, energy drinks, protein bars, vitamins, and other less identifiable substances in unmarked bottles. "Drink this," she said on day 31, handing me something that looked like water but moved wrong in the bottle. "It'll help maintain focus." I drank without questioning because questioning required energy I didn't have. The liquid tasted like static electricity and forgotten memories. And it did help, sharpening my awareness while simultaneously making the strange occurrences around me more comprehensible. "You're doing better than I expected," Christine admitted, sitting cross-legged on the counter during a rare moment when no customers, regular or otherwise, were present. Most people break by day 4 of double shifts, start seeing things that aren't there, or worse, stop seeing things that are. "How long did you do this?" I asked. 87 days, straight through without leaving. That was during the crisis of 2019, when the barrier weakened after a series of operators quit in rapid succession. We were down to just me and Trevor, and someone had to maintain continuous presence. She stared at nothing, remembering. By the end, I could see through all the layers simultaneously. Past, present, future, and the spaces between. It was beautiful and terrible, and it cost me something I can never get back. What did you lose? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The ability to live in just one timeline. Part of me is always here now, always on shift, always serving the regulars. Even when I'm somewhere else, doing something else, a fragment of my consciousness remains in this store, maintaining the protocols. That's the real price of the threshold. Not your time or your sanity, but your singularity. You become spread across the layers, diluted, no longer wholly yourself. The thought should have terrified me, but I was beyond terror. I had seen too much, adapted too thoroughly, become too integrated into the store's strange ecosystem to fear the loss of something as abstract as singular existence. On day 33, I discovered the safe zones Christine had mentioned. They weren't physical locations, but temporal ones. Specific moments when the pressure from beyond lessened and normal reality reasserted itself more strongly. 7:07 in the morning, when the sun hit the store at a particular angle. 1:13 in the afternoon, for exactly 90 seconds. 11:11 at night, a double mirror time that seemed to confuse whatever forces pressed against the barrier. During these moments, the store felt almost normal. The regulars would fade to invisibility. The fluorescent lights would stop their buzzing. The products would remain stationary on shelves. I would use these brief windows to accomplish tasks that required full attention. Balancing accounts, restocking complex inventory, making notes in my ever-expanding documentation. I also identified danger zones, times when the barrier grew particularly thin. For 44 in the morning, when a whispering man's predictions became most urgent. 6:66, an impossible time that somehow occurred in the gap between 6:59 and 7 o'clock. And the worst, 5:55 in the evening, right at the transition between day and night, when both sets of regulars would overlap and their combined presence would strain reality to its breaking point. Trevor provided additional survival tools. On day 35, he brought me a small radio that only played static. Keep this on during the danger zones, he instructed. The white noise helps mask the sounds from beyond the threshold, makes it easier to focus on the here and now. He also brought salt, which he instructed me to place in lines at specific locations, across the threshold to the back room, in a circle around the register, and in an intricate pattern near the walk-in cooler where the knocking had become a nightly occurrence. Salt is an old protection, he explained. It doesn't stop anything directly, but it defines boundaries, helps maintain the separation between what should be inside and what should remain outside. The salt helped more than I expected. The lines created psychological anchors, visible reminders of where safety ended and danger began. I developed a routine of refreshing them every shift change. The simple act of pouring salt becoming a ritual that grounded me in purpose. But as the days progressed and the convergence drew nearer, even these strategies became insufficient. The regulars grew more agitated, their arrivals more frequent, and their behaviors more erratic. Raymond came not just 11:15, but at 11:13, 11:17, and once, horrifyingly, at 11:11, during a safe zone when he shouldn't have been able to manifest at all. His appearance during that protected moment felt like a violation, a sign that the rules themselves were breaking down. Evelyn stopped maintaining her silence, speaking in fragments during her visits. The door strains, she would whisper. The hungry thing grows stronger. Time draws short, operator. Choose soon. Choose wisely. Choose it all. The coin collector's counts escalated dramatically. He found 113 coins on day 36, 179 on day 37, and on day 38, he didn't stop counting. He scanned and collected for hours, his metal detector screaming continuously, his journal filling with notations that spilled off the pages and onto his arms, his clothes, his exposed skin. When he finally left, he looked at me with something approaching pity and said, "The currency of souls is inflated. Soon the market crashes, and we all pay the debt." New regulars appeared almost daily now, each stranger than the last. The geometry woman whose body existed in impossible angles, her limbs bending in directions that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The flickering twins who appeared in stuttering frames like a corrupted video file, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes not there at all despite being absolutely present. The hungry man who purchased food items but never ate them, instead stacking them in elaborate structures around the store, monuments to some incomprehensible purpose that grew taller and more complex with each visit. By day 40, I was operating on instinct alone. My conscious mind had retreated to some protected core, while my body moved through the motions autonomously. Serve the regulars, follow the rules, maintain the schedule, refresh the salt lines, count the register, clean the surfaces, eat, drink Christine's strange liquids, exist in the liminal space between fully present and completely dissociated. The store became my entire world. I forgot what my apartment looked like, couldn't remember my roommates' names, had no concept of life beyond the fluorescent glow and the eternal cycle of transactions. Time lost meaning beyond the structured intervals of the schedule. Days and nights blurred together until there was only before convergence and during convergence, and, presumably, after convergence, though I couldn't imagine what that would look like. On day 42, 10 days before the Whispering Man's predicted convergence, Trevor pulled me aside during a transition period. "You need to know something," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The convergence, when it comes, will require a choice. The barrier won't fail completely, not if we've maintained the protocols correctly, but it will thin to the point where something can cross over in either direction." What kind of choice? Something from beyond can come through, or something from here can go beyond. The threshold requires balance. An exchange. That's how it's always worked, though the form of the exchange varies. The implications settled over me like a burial shroud. You're saying someone has to cross over, to go through that door and into the impossible spaces, or allow something to come through, Trevor confirmed. In past convergences, we've managed to find substitutes, people who were willing or desperate or already lost in ways that made the transition easier. But this convergence is larger, the pressure greater. It might require more than we can offer. What happens to whoever crosses? I don't know. No one who's gone through has ever come back. They exist in those spaces now, part of the eternal store, shopping forever in the corridors beyond the door. He met my eyes. But their sacrifice stabilizes the barrier, resets the convergence cycle, buys us years, maybe decades, before the pressure builds again. I thought about the names engraved on my keychain. All those previous operators. How many had made that choice? How many had walked through the door to protect a world that would never know what they'd prevented? Why me? I asked again, the same question I posed to Christine. Why specifically me? Because you're still sane, still functional, still capable of making the choice rather than being driven through by madness or desperation. Trevor's expression was anguished. I hate that this is the answer. Hate that the universe operates on this kind of cruel logic. But someone has to be the guardian, and the guardian has to be strong enough to shoulder the burden consciously. Over the next week, as the convergence date approached, I found myself spending more time staring at the forbidden door. It called to me constantly now, not with words but with pressure, with inevitability, with the gravity of destiny. I would stand at the threshold between the main store and the back room, feeling the pull, understanding more each day that Trevor was right. The choice had already been made, not by me, but for me, by forces I couldn't comprehend and circumstances I couldn't control. But I wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. So I clung to my survival strategies, my sanity checks, my small rituals and larger routines. I counted the register. I cleaned the surfaces. I served the regulars with meticulous attention to their rules. I maintained the salt lines. I drank Christine's strange liquids. I existed in the space between surrender and resistance, between terror and acceptance, between the person I had been and the sacrifice I might become. The fluorescent lights buzzed their eternal song. The regulars maintained their eternal schedules. The store continued its eternal function as way station and barrier and threshold between realities. And I, Jordan Blake, former nobody with student loans and no prospects, stood at the center of it all, holding the line against forces that cared nothing for my existence except as a means to an end. 3 days remained until convergence. 3 days to decide if I was brave enough to make the choice, or if I would force the universe to make it for me. 3 days to understand if survival was worth the cost of witnessing what came next. The whispering man appeared during a safe zone, shattering the last illusion that any moment was truly protected. He stood directly in front of the register, his unfocusable face turned toward me, and spoke clearly for the first time. 3 days, Jordan Blake. 3 days until everything changes. 3 days to choose between the world that will never thank you and the peace that comes with surrender. The door is already opening. The hungry thing already extends its tendrils. The only question is whether you walk through with dignity or are dragged through screaming. He placed something on the counter, a key, old and iron, and covered in rust that looked disturbingly organic. For when the time comes, for when the choice is made, one turn clockwise, and the door stays closed but you step through. One turn counterclockwise, and the door opens wide but you remain. Both options have consequences. Both require sacrifice. Choose well, or don't choose at all, and let the convergence decide for you. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the key, feeling its weight in my palm, understanding that in 3 days, everything I had become, everything I had survived, would culminate in a single moment where reality itself hung in the balance. And the worst part, the truly crushing realization, was that I had no idea what the right choice was. Both paths led to horror. Both demanded prices I wasn't sure I could pay. And yet, a choice had to be made. By me or for me. Consciously or by default. In 3 days, the convergence would arrive, and nothing in my life of call centers and student loans and convenience store shifts had prepared me for the responsibility of deciding which apocalypse to prevent. The final 3 days moved differently. Time stretched and compressed. Minutes becoming hours while hours vanished in heartbeats. The regulars sensed the approaching convergence, their behaviors reaching peaks of strangeness that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. The store itself groaned under the pressure, walls flexing, floor tiles lifting and resettling, fluorescent lights exploding and regenerating within seconds, as if the building was breathing its last breaths or being born anew. On day 49, 48 hours before convergence, the daytime protocols collapsed completely. The day regulars began appearing at night. The night regulars manifested during daylight. Mrs. Patterson purchased her newspaper at 3 in the morning. The phantom smoker materialized at noon, his not smoke visible even in the harsh clarity of midday sun. Time-bound rituals bled together, creating overlapping demands that should have been impossible to satisfy simultaneously. But I managed. The weeks of continuous presence had transformed me into something more than human, or perhaps less. My movements had become automatic, flowing between requirements without conscious thought. I could ring up Evelyn while preparing Raymond's coffee, while counting the coin collector's fines while avoiding the phantom smoker's haze, all without breaking stride or losing focus. I had become the perfect operator, the ideal guardian, efficient and emotionless and entirely consumed by function. Trevor watched from the periphery, his expression mixing pride and grief. He knew what I was becoming, what I had to become to survive this long. The cost of continuous operation wasn't just exhaustion or sanity. It was humanity itself. The person who had walked into this store 6 weeks ago, desperate for employment and naively optimistic, no longer existed. In their place stood something else, something shaped by rules and rituals, something more suited to the threshold than to the world beyond. Christine brought me food I couldn't taste and drinks I couldn't identify, ensuring my body continued functioning even as my mind drifted further into the spaces between. She said little, recognizing perhaps that words had lost their meaning for me. Communication happened through gestures now, through the subtle acknowledgments that had become the art of the nod extended to its ultimate conclusion. On day 50, 24 hours before convergence, the Whispering Man appeared every hour. On the hour, his predictions growing more specific and more terrifying. 24 hours until the hungry thing breaks its chains. 23 hours until reality remembers what it forgot. 22 hours until the choice becomes inevitable. Each pronouncement felt like a countdown to apocalypse, and perhaps it was. The other regulars grew agitated, their routines accelerating, as if they were trying to complete as many transactions as possible before everything changed. The coin collector found 347 coins in a single visit, his metal detector shrieking, his journal filling faster than he could write. Evelyn returned 4 times, purchasing the same items over and over, stacking them in corners, as if building fortifications against what was coming. And the door in the back room began opening on its own every 30 minutes. Just a crack, just enough to let a sliver of impossible light spill through, but each opening lasted longer than the previous. Trevor and I would take turns forcing it closed, pressing against the ancient wood with all our strength while the pull from beyond tried to yank us through. The key the Whispering Man had given me burned cold in my pocket, growing heavier with each passing hour. As midnight approached, marking the final day, the hungry thing made its presence known in ways that transcended subtle pressure. The walls didn't just breathe. They pulsed with visible veins of darkness, organic corruption spreading through inorganic material. The floor didn't just tilt, it warped, creating valleys and hills that made walking treacherous. And from beyond the threshold door came sounds, not the rhythmic knocking but voices, hundreds of them, thousands, all the previous operators and regulars and lost shoppers who had crossed over, calling for release or reinforcements or perhaps just acknowledging what was coming. Trevor gathered me and Christine at the register at 1 a.m. His hand shook as he spread out documents, blueprints of the store from various decades, maps of the surrounding area marked with symbols I couldn't decipher, and photographs of previous operators, their faces showing the same hollow exhaustion I saw in my reflection. "We're out of time for subtlety," Trevor said, his voice cracking under the weight of what he had to say. "The convergence begins at midnight tonight, 52 days from when Jordan started, which matches the pattern from previous major events. The barrier won't hold past that point. Something gives, one way or another." Christine leaned against the counter, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "You need to explain everything now, Trevor. No more half-truths or protective omissions. Jordan deserves to know exactly what they're walking into." Trevor nodded, running both hands through his hair. The 7-Eleven sits on what indigenous peoples called a thin place, where the membrane between worlds grows transparent. When European settlers arrived, they recognized it too, built trading posts and way stations here, because something about the location drew people. But it wasn't just drawing people, it was drawing everything. Entities, concepts, forces that don't belong in our reality, but press constantly against the boundaries, looking for ways through. In 1823, a traveling preacher realized what was happening. He performed a ritual, created a binding, established rules that would maintain the barrier. But bindings like that require constant maintenance, human presence, and intention to keep them active. So there's always been someone here, holding the line, serving the regulars who are part of the binding itself. The regulars aren't human, I said, though it wasn't really a question anymore. They're echoes, Christine explained. Fragments of people who crossed over in previous convergences. They're essential patterns preserved in the binding. They shop eternally because that transaction, that simple exchange of goods for currency, represents the fundamental rule of reality. Equivalent exchange, balance, the law that keeps chaos at bay. As long as the transactions continue, as long as the rituals are maintained, the barrier holds. Trevor continued, his words coming faster now, racing against the approaching deadline. But every 52 years, the pressure builds to critical levels. The hungry thing, we don't have a real name for it, just descriptions that don't capture the scope. It pushes harder, testing the barriers, looking for the weakness that will let it through. That's convergence. And to reset the binding, to reinforce the barrier for another cycle, requires a significant sacrifice. Someone crosses over, I said, finally speaking the truth we'd been dancing around for days. Someone becomes part of the binding, joins the regulars in their eternal shopping, adds their pattern to the maintenance system. Yes, Trevor confirmed, but it has to be voluntary, or mostly voluntary. A conscious choice made by someone who understands the stakes. Force someone through, and the binding rejects them, spits them back out changed and broken. But someone who chooses, who walks through knowing what they're doing. He trailed off, unable to finish. They stabilize everything, Christine finished. They become a new anchor point, their sacrifice powering the binding for the next cycle. And in exchange, the world continues, reality remains stable, and billions of people who will never know how close they came to something catastrophic get to live their normal lives. I looked at the key in my hand, understanding its function now. One turn clockwise, I go through and the door closes. One turn counterclockwise, the door opens and something comes through instead. But that second option isn't really an option, Trevor said grimly. If the door opens fully, if the hungry thing crosses over, it won't stop with the store. It'll spread, reality corruption radiating outward, transforming everything it touches into extensions of the chaos beyond. We've seen it happen in small doses, brief breaches. An hour of exposure created those two people who forgot their identities. 3 days in 1952 disappeared 17 people and caused nightmare cascades across the region. Full convergence, complete breach. We're talking about a reality-ending event. The weight of it settled over me, crushing and clarifying simultaneously. 6 weeks ago, I had been nobody, a failed call center employee with student loans and no prospects. Now I stood at the literal threshold between reality and chaos, holding in my hand the key to humanity's continuation or catastrophe. The universe's sick joke had reached its punchline, and I was the one who had to decide whether to laugh or scream. Is there really no third option? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. Christine shook her head. We've looked. For decades, centuries perhaps, people have looked. The binding is what it is. The rules are what they are. Someone crosses, or something breaks through. Those are the only choices. The remaining hours until midnight ticked away with excruciating awareness. The regulars came in waves, more than I'd ever seen, filling every available space in the store. Raymond stood at the counter, coffee in hand, unmoving for hours. Evelyn sat cross-legged in the center aisle, surrounded by her purchased items arranged in concentric circles. The coin collector scanned endlessly, his metal detector creating a soundtrack of chirps and beeps that sounded almost like language. The phantom smoker's haze filled the entire store, making everything gauzy and dreamlike. And the new regulars, all the strange beings I'd met in recent weeks, positioned themselves throughout the space like witnesses to an execution or coronation. The geometry woman folded herself into impossible corners. The flickering twins synchronized for the first time, both solid and present simultaneously. The hungry man's food monuments reached the ceiling, elaborate structures that formed symbols and patterns I could almost understand. At 11 o'clock, the door in the back room began opening continuously. Trevor and Christine gave up trying to close it, recognizing the futility. Through the widening gap, I could see those impossible corridors more clearly now. See the figures shopping in infinite recursion. See the vast darkness pressed against the far boundaries of that space. Tendrils of corruption reaching forward, testing, probing, hungry for release. At 11:30, the whispering man manifested directly beside me, his presence no longer causing disorientation, but instead bringing terrible clarity. "The time approaches, Jordan Blake," he said, his voice layered with harmonics that vibrated through my bones. "The choice must be made. The key must be turned. The sacrifice offered or the catastrophe permitted. You have carried this burden admirably, but now it reaches its conclusion. Tell me," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "If I cross over, what happens to me?" "Really?" The whispering man tilted his unfocusable head. "You become pattern. You become maintenance. You exist in all moments simultaneously, shopping eternally in the store beyond the store. Your consciousness diffused across the binding. You lose individuality, but gain purpose. You forget yourself, but remember function. It is neither death nor life, neither suffering nor peace. It simply is forever. And if I turn the key counterclockwise, then the hungry thing crosses. Reality warps, first locally, then spreading. Within hours, Ohio ceases to follow natural law. Within days, the corruption reaches major population centers. Within weeks, human civilization collapses under the weight of chaos physics. Within months, Earth becomes something else entirely, a playground for forces that care nothing for life as you understand it. He paused, but you wouldn't see most of that. The initial breach would unmake everyone in proximity immediately. Your death would be instantaneous and absolute. The bleak mathematics were clear. My existence, my consciousness, my sense of self, weighed against billions of lives and reality itself. An impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Except it was, because I could still choose the selfish option. Could turn the key counterclockwise, let the hungry thing through, and die knowing I had refused to sacrifice myself, even if it meant ending everything. That was the real test, I realized. Not whether I would make the right choice, but whether I would make any choice at all. Whether I had the courage to act decisively when both options led to horror, or whether I would freeze, paralyzed by impossibility, and let the convergence decide for me. At 11:45, Trevor approached with Christine beside him. Both looked haggard, aged by stress and sorrow. "We can't tell you what to do," Trevor said. "It has to be your choice, completely and consciously. But I want you to know that if you walk through that door, you'll be joining a tradition of guardians that stretches back centuries. Every person whose name is on that keychain made the same choice. They saw what needed doing, and they did it despite the cost." Christine took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Where you could run. Just walk away, get in your car, drive as far as you can before midnight. Let Trevor or me make the choice instead. You didn't ask for this responsibility. You just need a job. No one would blame you for refusing a burden you never agreed to carry." I looked around the store, at the regulars positioned like chess pieces in some cosmic game, at the walls breathing their final breaths, at the door in the back room, standing open and ready. I thought about the person I'd been 6 weeks ago, naive and desperate and normal. That person was gone, consumed by weeks of impossible experiences and grinding transformation. In their place stood someone else, someone shaped by the threshold and as something capable of what came next. If I don't do it, I said slowly, working through the logic, one of you will. Yes, Trevor confirmed. And you've already served your time, already paid your dues maintaining this place, holding the line for years. It would be unfair to ask you to sacrifice more after everything you've given. Fairness doesn't factor into convergence, Christine said softly. Only necessity. I nodded, accepting the truth of it. Then I pulled out the key, feeling its weight, its coldness, its terrible purpose. At 11:55, I walked toward the back room, hearing Trevor and Christine follow at a respectful distance. The regulars turned to watch, their eternal shopping pausing for the first time, bearing witness to the moment that would define the next cycle. The door stood fully open now, revealing the impossible corridors and their complete scope. I could see endless aisles stretching in non-Euclidean directions, could see the shoppers, hundreds, thousands, infinite iterations of previous guardians, moving through their eternal transactions. And beyond them all, pressed against the far boundaries, the hungry thing waited, vast and dark and patient, knowing that one wrong turn of the key would grant it everything it desired. At 11:58, I stood before the threshold, key in hand, aware of every regular's attention focused on this moment. The whispering man materialized beside the door, serving as witness or guide, or perhaps executioner. The choice, Jordan Blake, he intoned. Clockwise or counterclockwise. Sacrifice or catastrophe. Choose now. While choice remains possible, I thought about my parents, who I hadn't called in weeks, who would never know what happened to their child. I thought about my roommates, who would file a missing person report that would go nowhere. I thought about my student loans, which would eventually be discharged due to my disappearance, a cosmic joke of debt forgiveness through oblivion. I thought about all the normal dreams I'd once had, career, relationships, a life of ordinary struggles and minor triumphs, all rendered irrelevant by circumstance and necessity. And I thought about the billions of people who would wake up tomorrow, completely unaware of how close they'd come to annihilation, who would complain about traffic and argue about politics, and fall in love and break hearts, and live their beautifully mundane lives because someone they'd never meet had stood in a rural Ohio 7-Eleven and made an impossible choice. At 11:59, I inserted the key into a lock that hadn't existed a moment before, a keyhole that formed in response to the key's presence. My hand was steady. My breathing was calm. I had become, in these final moments, exactly what the threshold required. Someone capable of accepting the unacceptable. For what it's worth, Trevor said from behind me, his voice thick with emotion, "You've been the best operator we've ever had, and you deserve so much better than this." I smiled, though he couldn't see my face. Maybe, but someone had to be here. Might as well be me. At midnight exactly, as the convergence reached its peak and reality held its breath, I turned the key clockwise. The effect was immediate and absolute. The door didn't close so much as resolve, shifting from aperture to barrier in a blink. But I was already moving, already stepping forward, already crossing the threshold between one existence and another. I felt myself stretch, my consciousness diffusing across impossible dimensions, my sense of self fragmenting into pattern and purpose. The last thing I heard from the real world was Christine's sob and Trevor's whispered, "Thank you." Then I was in the corridors, among the eternal shoppers, and I understood everything with terrible clarity. I was Jordan Blake, but I was also the binding, the maintenance, the pattern that would hold the barrier for the next 52 years. My consciousness existed in all moments simultaneously, shopping and serving, and being shopped for in recursive loops that had no beginning or end. I could see my own multiplied forms moving through the aisles, selecting items that represented fundamental concepts: balance, exchange, transaction, order. I could feel the hungry thing on the other side of the barrier, pushing constantly, but unable to breach now that new anchors had been added. I could sense the regulars, my companions in eternal service, welcoming me into their infinite routine. And I could see, through fractures in time, what came next. Trevor closing the store for 3 days, performing the reset rituals that would stabilize the new binding. Christine leaving, unable to face the place that had claimed another guardian. A new operator being hired eventually, someone else desperate and unlucky enough to take a night shift position at a rural Ohio 7-Eleven. The cycle continuing, as it always had, as it always would, until the next convergence in 2077. I existed in that space for what felt like forever and no time at all. Part of me remained aware of the real world, watching through the eyes of regulars as life at the 7-Eleven continued. I saw the new operator, a woman named Alex, struggle through her first encounters with Raymond and Evelyn. I watched her receive the list, read the rules, slowly transform from normal person into threshold guardian. I witnessed her horror and adaptation and eventual acceptance, knowing that in 52 years, she might face the same choice I had made. But mostly I shopped, endlessly, eternally, moving through impossible aisles selecting items that maintained the binding. Coffee that represented consistency, soup that symbolized comfort, cigarettes that embodied transition. Each item a small piece of a larger pattern. Each transaction a stitch in the fabric separating reality from chaos. Years passed in the real world while I existed in timeless service. I watched seasons change through the store windows, saw the 7-Eleven undergo minor renovations and major updates, observed technology advancing while the fundamental purpose remained unchanged. Trevor aged, his hair going fully gray, his movements becoming slower. Christine disappeared from the story entirely, choosing a life far from the threshold. Alex, server time, lasted 8 years before quitting, unable to face the possibility of her own convergence. Other operators came and went, their tenures varying from weeks to decades. Some broke under the pressure, violating rules and creating small breaches that required emergency intervention. Some adapted perfectly, becoming extensions of the store's purpose. And a very few, served their full cycle and walked away, having fulfilled their obligation without sacrificing their individuality. I watched it all from my diffused existence, simultaneously present in every moment and absent from all of them, pattern and person, and something else entirely. The loneliness was absolute, but also meaningless. I was too distributed to experience isolation in any conventional sense. The purpose was constant, but also abstract. I maintained the barrier not through conscious effort, but through mere existence. Sometimes, in the spaces between transactions, I would catch glimpses of the hungry thing, still pressed against the far boundaries, still waiting patiently for the binding to weaken. It hadn't given up, would never give up, because things like it operated on time frames that made human civilization look like a brief candle flame. It had waited millennia, would wait millennia more, eternally testing the barriers for the weakness that would finally grant it passage. And I understood, in my diffused consciousness, that my sacrifice had bought time, but not victory. The convergence would come again. Another operator would face the choice. The cycle would continue until either humanity found a permanent solution or the hungry thing finally broke through. But for now, for the next decades, the barrier held. Reality remained stable. Billions of people lived their lives, completely unaware of the thin place in rural Ohio where chaos pressed constantly against order. And in a 7-Eleven that served as way station and threshold and prison all at once, The regulars shopped eternally, their patterns maintaining the boundary between existence and annihilation. I was one of them now. Jordan Blake, former call center employee, former night shift operator, current guardian and binding an eternal shopper. I moved through the impossible corridors, selecting items that represented universal constants, participating in transactions that held reality together one exchange at a time. Sometimes I would manifest in a real store, a translucent figure browsing shelves during the dead hours when new operators thought they were alone. Sometimes I would appear in the security footage, a glitch in the corner of the frame. Sometimes the current operator would feel my presence, a weight in the air, a sense of being watched by something that understood their burden because it had carried the same weight. And on very rare occasions, when the barrier thinned slightly and the layers overlapped, I would achieve enough coherence to communicate, to whisper warnings to operators who strayed too close to breaking rules, to offer comfort to those who struggled with the isolation, to bear witness to their service and acknowledge their sacrifice, even if they would never have to make the ultimate choice I had made. The story of the 7-Eleven in rural Ohio continued, generation after generation, operator after operator, convergence after convergence. A small place with enormous purpose, a convenience store that served as one of reality's critical anchors, a threshold where the mundane and the impossible existed in careful balance. And I was part of it now, forever and always, shopping eternally in corridors that defied physics, serving a purpose larger than individual existence, maintaining the barrier that kept humanity safe from forces it could never comprehend. The fluorescent hum became my heartbeat. The electronic door chime became my breath. The endless transactions became my existence. I was the binding, and the binding was me. And together we held the line against the darkness that waited beyond. Somewhere in the real world, a new operator was starting their first shift, receiving the key and the list and the warnings. They would struggle and adapt and serve, hopefully making it through their tenure without facing convergence. And if they did face it, if 52 years from my choice brought them to the same threshold I crossed, I would be there among the witnesses, a translucent figure in the eternal crowd, shopping my eternal pattern, offering by my mere presence the only comfort I could provide, that they were not the first, would not be the last, and their sacrifice mattered more than they would ever know. The 7-Eleven glowed in the darkness, fluorescent beacon in the Ohio night, serving truckers and farmers and lost travelers who had no idea what they were really visiting. The regulars maintained their schedules with perfect precision. The rules evolved and adapted as new operators added their interpretations, and the binding held, maintained by centuries of sacrifice and service, protecting a world that would never know how many times it had come within minutes of complete annihilation. This was the truth behind the bizarre rules and strange customers, behind the night shift protocols and Trevor's warnings. This was why people disappeared, why the job paid slightly more than it should, why the turnover was so high and the hiring so desperately constant. The 7-Eleven needed operators, reality needed guardians, and the convergence cycle demanded periodic sacrifice. I had been one of the lucky ones, I realized with my diffused consciousness. I had served, chosen, sacrificed, and in doing so had given my life meaning beyond the mundane struggles of debt and employment. I had stood at the threshold when standing was required, had made the impossible choice when choosing was necessary, and had become part of something larger than individual existence. The lingering shadow of the 7-Eleven wasn't darkness, but purpose. The horror wasn't in the strangeness, but in the necessity. And the true terror wasn't what lurked beyond the threshold, but the quiet courage of ordinary people who stood at the edge of chaos and decided, despite everything, to hold the line. I shop eternally in the corridors beyond the door, selecting items that represent universal constants, participating in transactions that maintain the barrier between order and entropy. I am Jordan Blake, and I am the binding, and I am the reason reality remains stable in this small corner of existence. And somewhere in rural Ohio, in a 7-Eleven that glows through the night, the regulars arrive precisely on schedule. The operator follows the rules with careful attention, and the threshold holds for another day, another week, another year, another convergent cycle. The fluorescent lights hum their eternal song, and I hum with them, forever,